In the last lesson, we have gone through proposal distributions, detailed balance condition, and the need to account for detailed balance condition using the Q ratio in the proposal distribution. And this is basically all the code placed together, and which is running with details about RMSE acceptance rate, likelihood, and prior. So I'll just move on to the next lesson, which is how do we apply linear models and Bayesian neural networks for classification. So in the case of classification, I think we mentioned earlier discussing probability distributions, so that in the case when we have discrete outcomes, there's binomial, Bernoulli, and multinomial probability distributions, right? So multinomial probability distribution can take care of binary classification and multi-class classification. And this is essentially the log form of a multinomial probability distribution, where k classes k is 1 to k, and this pi subscripted with k is the output of the neural network model. So applying the transfer function, right? And that transfer function in here, the k is the soft max transfer function, right? This is the soft max transfer function. So we have gone over the soft max transfer function. Essentially, it's a total and the current divided by total. So for k 1 to k, and k is an indicator value for the given instance of data. We define k in the data y. Right? So in the case when we want to use Bayesian neural network, such as a Langevin gradient Bayesian neural network for classification, the thing is, note that in here, in this, we can use this to form our likelihood, right? This is a multinomial log likelihood. This is the multinomial log likelihood. And you can see that this looks a bit simplified compared to the Gaussian log likelihood, which is used for regression problems. The multinomial log likelihood does not have a tau squared parameter, right? It does not it is not following a signal plus noise model where you need to have a tau squared parameter. Hence, in this model, we are not going to have priors for the tau squared parameter, and we're not really needed to draw that parameter, you know. So just a sec. So we do not need to account for the prior for the tau squared parameter, and hence our prior distribution becomes much simpler. And this is the prior distribution for the weights and the biases. We do not have the tau squared parameter in this, and we're not going to do a random walk on it either. So we have a case now where we can, let's say that we develop a model, a more generic code where we have the Gaussian log likelihood, which was for regression or prediction problems. And we have the case where for classification, we'll use a multinomial log likelihood. So we define a log likelihood function, and it takes, depending on the problem, it will work. So we have one piece of code now. It can work for both regression and classification. So the log prior, in the case of prior regression problems, and we have the classification problem, So we have two functions. So we have this master functions, which we call those different functions as needed. So the Gaussian log likelihood is what we had in the past, right? And you have the same thing, neural network evaluate proposal, and you get calculate the log likelihood, Gaussian log likelihood. And for the prior, the Gaussian prior, as I said, it uses the tau squared parameter. You have the standard nu1, nu2. So it's the previous code, we are putting it all together. Now we have the multinomial log likelihood, and this is essentially this whole thing here is implementing this. Yes, you can see that there are two some expressions, which means it's a nested for loop, right? And this whole thing, the log part, you can see the log is here, the nested for loop is direct implementation of that. Just a sec. Right. So that's the likelihood, multinomial log likelihood. Then for classification problems, we have the prior, and the prior in the classification problem, we do not need to account for the tau squared parameter. So my apologies with this code. We have the nu1, nu2 passed as parameters, but we are actually not using it anywhere in this. So we just have the, we are just looking for the calculating the parameter for the Gaussian prior in this case. And that's, we only need the sig squared, and we just need the W. The nu1, nu2 are not useful here because they were used in the case of the inverse gamma, which we are not calculating. So we have the sampler, and in the sampler, in this code implementation, we apply the rest of the things remain the same. The Langevin gradients remain the same, right? So irrespective of your problem, the Langevin gradients are the same because for the classification, if your model is based on the gradients of a sigmoid function, then this will work. So we have this, the problem that comes here. If the problem is a regression problem, then we are going to do a random walk on the eta. And if it is a classification problem, then we do not do anything, right? So now we, either it's regression or classification, we are going to get the proposal likelihood and the RMSE values of the prediction train prediction test. And we are calculating the prior. So note that the prior proposal, we call these things, and it will go and call the prior proposal in here. For example, and then it will look for the correct path there. So I will go into the entire code next, but just saying that here we apply this, for example, the iris classification problem, and you can use the same strategy in the multinomial likelihood for the linear model. And that's called a multinomial regression. So just like logistic regression you do for binary classification, when you have multi-class classification in a linear model, it's called multinomial regression. And that's what we have here. We have a multi-class multinomial regression linear model, and it's using the MCMC sampler. And we basically trained them using for the iris problem. So iris 3 classes and ionosphere. I think ionosphere is a binary classification problem, if I remember correctly, and that's the acceptance probability. So we have a high acceptance probability in this case. I just want to go back to previous lesson because I don't think I covered the results. So remember, we were covering the results where we were looking at the Bayesian neural network for linear regression prediction problem. And in this case, we were saying that the MCMC sampler is having a low probability, random walk MCMC, and then there's Langevin dynamics MCMC. So we applied that same problem to, we have another code implementation, which we are giving with this tutorial with some values in the random walk, Langevin gradients we are applying. We have a little bit lower acceptance rate when we're comparing with the MCMC-based linear model or linear regression model with the, so we do it for the sunspot, and we also done it for the abalone classification problems, and the notebooks are given there. The RMSE train and test. What we can see is that the linear model RMSE and the Bayesian neural network, the RMSE, the Bayesian neural network is 0.02 here, and this is 0.02726. So it's close to the linear model in this case, but not better for the sunspot problem. But for the abalone problem, it is a little bit better. Means the RMSE is lower than the. Note that this sunspot problem is a univariate time series problem, and it's a very small neural network with 5 hidden neurons. So in such type of small neural networks, usually the linear model at times is better, than a neural network. But when your model is larger, such as a abalone, with a lot of features and the data size is huge, then you can get results like that. And this is more visualization for the observed model and the 95% confidence interval obtained from the posterior distribution and some inferences. So this was for in the previous lesson for the case of regression. And this is the case and applying that same code, but with the multi-nomial model function, activation function in the output layer for the case of classification. And we're putting all the code together. We see this. So you have a neural network class, and you have in the backward pass, right? In backward pass, if it is classification, you do one hot encoding, and the gradients are the same, essential. And okay, there's some bug that I need to fix later. So this is just doing double for loops. The decode is there. Langevin gradient is the same. And evaluate proposal, because for classification in the evaluate proposal, when you do a forward pass, if it's a classification, then we are using a softmax activation function. So we run that. And if otherwise, it's the same. So log likelihood regression classification, and as I showed earlier, the multinomial likelihood, prior likelihood sampler is given there, and all the rest are almost the same. For the Langevin gradients, it's the same code. And here we have the prior, self.prior, and it takes the new one, new two proposal, and depending on the type of problem, because you do get the difference, prior difference likelihood here, and you would get the difference proposal, the difference of the proposal or the Q ratio there. So we just have this way to ensure that we do not have a numerical error. So we just re-implemented this with this. So that part is there, the same, the prior is there. And that prior is function is calling this, and if it's regression, it's using that classification, it's using this. So this is essentially putting it all together. And what we are doing is running it a range of problems from first three two are time series prediction problems. The third one is a regression problem, multivariate features. Then we have a classification problem. The binary classic. So the last one is ionosphere, and the second last is iris three class classification. So depending on the different types of problems, if the regression problem, then we see those outputs. So I didn't get the chance to run this code, but I think you can try running it. Hopefully it is working. Right. So yeah, there's some slight issue, but I think it's working. Yeah. Anyways, I'll just cut this throughout. So that's the results there. And now the question comes, how do we ensure that, how many samples should we use? Like in the case of neural networks with backpropagation, it is clear that you should be using, I mean, the training epochs, you're training accuracy on the validation set can be useful to say that, okay, 100 epochs is okay, or 200 epochs is okay. Or you stop when you achieve a certain classification accuracy. But this is not the same when you're looking at probabilistic models, because in probabilistic models, what our goal is that we want, once a model has converged, firstly, in probabilistic models, once a model has converged, you do not need to do 30 experimental runs. Whereas for the deterministic models, like a backpropagation neural network, you need to do 30 experimental runs to get the mean and standard deviation, and it basically accounts for the uncertainty in the predictions. You know how well your model is doing because you are randomly initializing the neural network weights and biases differently for every run. But in the case of Bayesian neural networks and the MCMC-based model training, once you know it's converged, right, then that's it. That one single run is enough. You could do a couple of runs to find the right hyperparameters, and once it's converged, one run is enough. And then you are basically, let's say a customer is coming, you are developing a model for heart disease classification, diagnosis, and your customer is a set of doctors. And you are basically giving them a trained model now with the posterior distribution. And in the implementation, you will implement, let's say, online system, real-time system, where the model will draw from that posterior distribution. So once the model has converged, basically the idea of convergence is no matter how many times you are going to run the model and you do the trials, your results will be similar to the test performance, right? That's the whole idea of uncertainty quantification and using probabilistic models. It is that you need to ensure that these models have converged. And a lot of theoretical works have been done in the area of computational statistics for linear models. And in the case of linear models, we see that it is, you have a univariate Gaussian distribution. So you have like nice Gaussian distributions. Whereas in the case of neural networks, because there are too many weights and parameters, and a lot of those weights and parameters are not really used, meaning they are not really needed, right? And it is important to prune the neural networks. You can drop some of those weights and biases. And one of our tutors, Mr. Ratanil Deo, is actually writing one of his final papers for his PhD. And next year we'll put it in archive, where we are using MCMC approach to prune, meaning drop some of the weights and biases that are not really useful in having, they're not really helpful. So you want to have compact models where you have nice posterior distributions. Nice meaning that you try to have unimodal posterior distributions. So if you have good posterior distributions, that means your trace plot, you have sampled it well, and the ergodicity issue is not there, you have converged properly. And how do you measure that? You measure that with convergence diagnosis. And one way to measure convergence diagnosis is using the Gelman-Rubin diagnosis, which is one of the very basic ones. And it is, you take multiple posterior distributions. So you take 3 or 4 runs of a neural network sampling process. You take those posterior distribution files, and then you compare how they are different. So from different experimental runs, you take chains. So chains means the history, the posterior distribution file. And then you do an assessment within chain variances for each parameter between chains and within chains. So all of those parameters within how they have the variance and how they are comparing with the different experiments, the variance. So with that, there's calculation for the PSRF, potential scale reduction factor. And in that computation, you get something called the R hat values, right? And that we have implemented in our tutorial, but this is kind of beyond the scope of this lesson, but we showed in the tutorial results of that. So potential, the R hat value is close to 1, generally of the different weights and biases. Those that are more close to 1, that means that those have converged. So you can see here that the linear model, the green ones, are more close to 1, the R hat values, especially for the abalone Aries and ionosphere. So they have converged, but the linear plus model here, which is slightly different than the linear model, but they are both linear models. They are both better in here than the Bayesian neural network probe model in terms of convergence. So this is a major challenge of Bayesian neural network is convergence diagnostics, because convergence diagnostics assume unimodality in the posterior distribution, at least the basic ones. And we, in the case of neural networks, it's multimodal posterior distributions. So convergence is a whole, like a research area of its own. And that has a lot of open questions in the case of Bayesian neural networks and Bayesian deep learning models with a Markov chain Monte Carlo methods. So the other one is autocorrelation time, and autocorrelation reference to so you look at the posterior, meaning the trace plot as a time series, and delayed copy of itself over successive time intervals. So you take, you look at a time series and you can make some windows and then slide that windows, and you can check the mean and standard deviation of those smaller windows. It's kind of delayed copy itself, and that's a way to measure the autocorrelation times. And then it measures the relationship between a variable's current value and its past value, right? So you could take some statistics, the mean and standard deviation, for example, and see the correlation. You can also take the correlation, compute correlation coefficients and other things. So autocorrelation represents a perfect positive correlation, while in autocorrelation of negative one represents a negative autocorrelation. And that is used to compute a time, and it's used as a convergence diagnostics for MCMC algorithms, and it's implemented in the MCMC, and there's a tutorial, so you can run that, and basic Python functions are there. So those are there, and some references in here. So that's all about convergence. There's a lot of resources in about Bayesian logistic regression, Bayesian regression in R, and there are libraries out there, and we have like a code from scratch in R that is showing the chains, posterior distributions, and so on. So the next is what are the advanced topics in Bayesian neural networks? So as I said, that sampling multimodal posterior distributions in Bayesian neural networks is difficult. And when I was at the University of Sydney, I wrote this paper, I developed all this program for sampling, MCMC sampling in a parallel processing architecture. So just imagine that the problem comes when your neural network is very large, such as a deep learning model, or even simple neural networks can be large because you have a lot of hidden neurons, a couple of hidden layers, and the problem size is large, lots of features. So using MCMC on them and taking 10,000 samples may take days, couple of days or a week, for larger problems. Like if you want to try MCMC sampling on the MNIST dataset or CFL dataset, computer vision datasets, that's going to take more than a week probably. So you need to use parallel processing. And these days, I mean, now we have like new desktops, and we have Dell Optiplex and other smaller desktops, which you can carry around, but they have like 15 or 20 cores in a small machine. This was not kind of available 10 years ago. But anyways, we developed the code to generalize that. We have different MCMC samplers running in different cores. And the whole architecture, this of parallel running MCMC sampling cores is known as parallel tempering. And this is based on parallel tempering is a algorithm on its own, and it was not used for Bayesian neural networks. And I guess I'm one of the first persons to actually implement it for Bayesian neural networks back then, and then placed the Langevin gradients in there, and then implemented open source code of parallel processing. So that's what it looks like. You have different Bayesian neural networks, and there's communication. Like after a certain number of samples, you could have one process giving its weights and biases to the other process. So the idea of parallel tempering is that there's within chain. So you have multiple chains, and then the chains communicate, and then the exchange, just as you accept and reject news proposals within a chain, there can be interchange communication and exchange of that information, right? And then there is like a temperature value given to different chains, and that means some of the chains have a higher probability of accepting weaker solutions. So that kind of helps the algorithm escape a local mean. So there's a lot of work done in replica Monte Carlo work. One of the first things algorithms was this, and they're published in physical review letters. These are not to do with neural networks and all that, but general models, statistical models. And then 1995 became more popular after 86. And 2005 slowly, and and then it's kind of quite popular in the geoscience area. So Malcolm Sandbridge is a very prominent professor at INU. I had the opportunity to kind of sit with him in Perth during a conference, have a glass of wine and discuss about parallel tempering. He has implemented this and has a lot of resources. Bayesian optimization is another area that's using Bayesian inference theory behind Bayesian inference and bringing it into the optimization sphere. This is like used in things where your model is computationally very expensive. So to run one model is difficult, let's say. It takes a couple of hours or a couple of days, and you need to, let's say, get parameters, estimate parameters for such models. And these are some examples, geoscientific inversion problems, models. So rather than running 10,000 samples on a model, which one model takes 1 hour, it would be 10,000 hours. I don't know how many weeks will that be. Then you could firstly run it in different processing cores, right? That will reduce the time. And the other thing is that you can then apply this Bayesian optimization strategy where for the model you have like a low cost model, which is like a machine learning model. So for the geoscientific model is there, which takes 1 hour to run. But then you have some low cost model like a small neural network, which kind of is a replica of the geoscientific model. And it takes a few seconds to run. So you sometimes evaluate the actual geoscientific model, or do you take the replica model like a small neural network and evaluate that? And we did that for landscape evolution models and published that. And the Bayesian optimization is quite prominent in machine learning, where you want to know what are the right hyperparameters for different models, such as what's the right learning rate, number of hidden neurons, and other hyperparameters for the case of neural networks. Then you can use Bayesian optimization for that. So Bayesian optimization is quite a powerful tool in our research area on its own. Variational inference is an approximation of the MCMC sampling strategy. And it's also called Bayes variational inference or Bayesian variational inference. And we are doing some work about this in our group, applying this to deep neural networks. Arpit Kapoor has done some work. I've placed it here. And recently we are just applying for medical time, like data series imputation. And we have used also Bayesian inference with MCMC for data imputation. So these things can be used in places where you really need to know uncertainty quantification and where you do not know, we have lack of data and you want to make data. So there's a huge area of Bayesian variational inference, and you have they are more used in the area of neural networks than MCMC methods, because MCMC methods are methods where you're directly sampling from the posterior distribution, whereas variational inference method is like an approximate approach. So you do not need to construct these posterior distributions and worry too much about convergence diagnosis. It's, let's say, it's in between backpropagation, extended backpropagation, and MCMC approach. It's a kind of the best of both worlds. It's in the middle, and it gives a form of uncertainty quantification, which is approximate, not exact, but it works. Okay, so it's quite useful for deep learning models. So that's variational inference and applications to MCMC. We have used it in applications to reef modeling, like we want to know what type of environmental conditions were happening in the last, 10,000 years of the Great Barrier Reef. So there's these reef evolution models. We have drill core data, and there's this is an example of a geoscientific model, nothing to do with machine learning or neural networks, but it has unknown parameters that needs to be estimated. it has some data. The data is the model repo, and you give, and then that data you try to match with the predicted data. And the predicted data will be predicted similar to the actual data when it will have the right set of inputs, and you do not know the right set of inputs so of that model. And that's when you use an MCMC approach to iteratively propose that right set of inputs and find which set of inputs actually model the data well. So that's what we use the MCMC approach for that. And similarly, we have landscape evolution models. Basically, we want to look at the past history of the planet, millions of years back in history. And we've done used MCMC approach to for very small synthetic models. So for example, this is a model, and after 10,000 years, after rainfall and erodibility and all this weathering, it becomes like this. This is flat surface, but with uplift from the Earth's surface below. And this is around Christchurch in New Zealand, the topology, and we kind of let it run for a million years of simulation, which takes a few minutes, these things, a million years, because these are very small models. So we were trying to do this for Australia, but that project was not completed. But this is the visualization in the case of Australia for so the model is called Badlands, and you need to find what are the right rainfall patterns and stuff. And this is the million years back in history, and this is led by the Earthbite group, Professor Dietmar Müller, was my previous mentor, and Tristan Sales. And it basically shows the history of Australia for 130, 140 million years. And back here, 20, 40 million years, certain parts of Australia, and see 90, 91 million years ago, they were underwater. So it's trying to bring all this Bayesian inference to kind of estimate what types of weather condition, rainfall conditions we had. So it's that area is also known as paleoclimatology. This is very difficult things in geoscience and a lot of potential. And this is, we're looking at the posterior distribution of rainfall pattern. And very tough multimodal posterior distributions we can see here due to the complex nature of the Badlands model. We tried to implement a parallel tempering approach and look at the difference. We try to slice that 3D surface and see the uncertainties in that sliced 3D surface. So moving on, we have there are a number of MCMC libraries out there, PyMC3, STAN, and EMC. And they have their own docs and tutorials and a number of other references that could get you into the field. So as an exercise, I would suggest that to apply all these to different types of problems from the UCI machine learning repository and others, and see how it goes. I think this is all for today, right? Just checking if there's any major questions. Okay, then we'll have this discussion later about some things, and we are going to cover it again. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.